Hello AmericansChannel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
This dog got nationwide fame in the most miraculous of ways. He and his owner were walking across the airport's main hall when the attentive 9 suddenly focused on an unassuming drain cover on the floor. Airport staff quickly got involved, but no matter how much they tried, the dog wouldn't budge an inch from the drain. And when staff members got closer, they suddenly realized why. Dog keeps staring at drain. Then airport staff finds out why. The dog in question was named Wilson, a 7-year-old brown dog who had just flown over 2,000 miles from Denver to Boston. He was ready to leave the plane that carried him, and his owner, Mary, was already waiting for him by the baggage drop terminal. All traveling pets would enter the airport there, and Wilson's owner nervously waited for him to be in her arms again. Mary worried for her dog's well-being because she had never flown with him before, and leaving him behind in the plane's cargo space just felt wrong. But just a few moments after being reunited with Wilson, those worrying thoughts were the last thing on her mind, because what Wilson did next would dominate the rest of his owner's day completely. After a big hug, Mary and Wilson entered the airport's main hall. From there, people could get on to other flights and reach taxis, which would take travelers into town. And that was where Mary and her dog needed to go next. But a taxi ride home would have to wait because just a few minutes after entering the man hall, 9 Wilson had made other plans. Mary saw the taxi driver standing outside and turned her body toward the glass doors leading to them. But right before she reached them, Wilson suddenly pulled harshly on his leash in the opposite direction. He clearly did not want to go outside and had his mind set on another part of the building. Mary looked at her dog and saw him constantly pointing his ears and sniffing. It wasn't like Wilson to not follow Mary's. He was very attached, so normally he stuck to her like a magnet on metal. So for the brown shepherd to sharply pull away from her was odd. At first, Mary figured that it must have been the confusion that still lingered within him from that long cargo flight. But soon, she found out that it had an entirely different reason. "We will be home soon, boy," Mary said to her dog, who became more restless by the minute. His leash tightened, and pretty soon, Mary had a hard time holding on. Her dog was strong, and Mary had never been in a situation where she noticed it this much. It started irritating Mary, so she pulled on the leash harshly this time, much to her dog's dislike. Wilson growled at his owner, which startled Mary, and that initial shock caused Mary to lose grip just for a moment. Her hand spread out a bit, and by doing so, she dropped her suitcase, causing it to open up all over the airport floor. And that was not all that happened because Wilson also took notice of this situation. The clever dog used this moment to usher in his escape. While Mary crouched down to refill her suitcase, her mind was occupied, allowing Wilson to escape her grasp fully. He loosened the tension on his leash for just a moment, but then ran with all his might away from his owner. The pure power caused Mary's other hand to open up completely, letting Wilson escape and run away. The now freed dog sprinted across the airport's main hall. Mary screamed his name, but its effect was disappointing. Wilson didn't even flinch and simply kept running in a straight line. The worried Mary saw her dog disappear into a sea of people, all unaware of what had just happened. "What is up with that dog?" Mary said to herself. She quickly repacked her clothes and followed in her dog's direction. The suitcase wheels rolled across the airport floor while Mary pushed travelers aside to get to her dog. Many people were in this one space, but as she got closer, they made it easy to find Wilson. That was because most of them had their heads turned the same way. They all faced Mary's missing dog, who had found his target in the corner of the main hall. Mary slowed her pace and walked over to the spot where a small group of people circled her pet. There was a buzz going on. People were chatting amongst each other, all wondering what was going on with this dog. This was exactly what Mary also wanted to know, so she pushed her body through the dense crowd to reach her poor, confused pet. But Wilson wasn't confused at all. He had a very clear reason for being where he was. He wanted to show his owner and everyone around him something very important, but he just didn't have the means to communicate that properly, so he used the only tools he had available. The Focus 9 started whining and scratching on the floor, mostly making contact with a small water drain in front of him. After Wilson noticed that people were paying attention, he even doubled down by pushing his nose toward the round roster. Is there something in there that he wants us to see?" One of the onlookers said out loud, onto which Wilson instantly barked. Mary was also captivated by this unusual display. She addressed the crowd, stating that he was her dog and apologizing for the inconvenience. The pet owner grabbed Wilson's leash once more, trying to pull him away from the drain, but that would turn out to be impossible. Wilson snarled, wept, and barked like a dog possessed, not wanting to leave the drain cover for just a moment. "What is it with this drain, Wilson? What are you trying to tell us?" Well, the answer to that question will become clear very soon. And the people who would help provide that answer had already arrived. Wilson's loud noises attracted the attention of many people, including some of the airport staff members. A security guard and a utility worker had stepped up and were now joining the pack of people surrounding this loud dog. "What is going on? Who is the owner of this animal?" the guard asked. Mary held up her hand and instantly apologized for the awkward situation. She assured them that her dog usually wasn't like this, and the last thing she wanted was to cause so much commotion. "He is somehow fixated with this water drain, sir. So much so that ever since we entered the main hall, he no longer listened to me." The staff members listened closely and then stepped in. The guard took the lead and asked the crowd surrounding Wilson to make some room. "What is it, little friend?" The gray-haired security guard spoke as he crouched down beside the dog. Mary was happy that he took Wilson's behavior very seriously and approached the clearly confused Pete with cautious movements and a soft voice. The man petted Wilson carefully first. Wilson responded by whining but continued to press his nose against the drain cover. "What is it, boy? Is there something down there?" the man asked, squinting his eyes. The guard ordered his utility colleague to get some tools from his work office. They were going to open this cover to see what the fuzz was all about. Everyone was intrigued to see what was down there. Some travelers even admitted that their taxi was waiting outside, but they passed up on it just to see what would be found. A crowbar was placed in the slits of the cover, and the two airport staff members pulled upward with force. It was in there quite tightly, but after some effort, they lifted the cover, revealing the hollow space beneath it. Wilson barked as a sign of approval. Wilson instantly pushed his snout down when the cover was out of the way. The people surrounding the dog could hear him sniff the air deeply. There clearly was something important inside that drain. Otherwise, this dog would not have acted this strangely. At that point, nobody knew what it was, but it would be Wilson who would guide their way. Because what the surrounding onlookers and even Mary did not know was that Wilson possessed a unique skill that would prove vital in this strange situation. This skill would make him famous by helping out in a major way. The airport guard twisted the top of his flashlight a couple of times to turn it on. Then he went on to look down the drain pipe with it. Everyone above ground waited nervously for the head of the airport guard to come up again. They wanted to hear his verdict, all expecting something major. There were rumors of hidden treasures going around, or maybe even some illegal substances hiding underneath the very floor on which they stood. But after the security lifted his head again, he came back with disappointing news. There wasn't a whole lot to be seen down there. He saw some food wrappings that probably ended up there by accident, but otherwise, there was only dust down there. He even admitted to himself that he hoped for more. Disappointed, he started placing the lid back onto the open water hole. And that's when it happened. He was still close to the ground, and suddenly he heard a sound. It came from within the drain. It was so soft that of all the people present, only he could hear it since he was so close. But there was someone else who noticed it too. Wilson sat beside the security guard and stared at the confused employee. "I heard something coming from within the drain. Was that what drew you in, boy?" the guard asked Wilson, who whined in response. Dogs' hearing is far superior to that of humans, so it made sense for Wilson to notice something before anyone in the airport did. But what was it? The security guard placed his ear close to the drain and heard it again. It was very high-pitched, and it sounded sad in a way. The man stood up and asked his utility colleague where the drain eventually led. The colleague in the blue jumper thought about it and then said that this drainage, besides running to a pipe outside the building to lose the water, also came very close to the building's ventilation system. This comment instantly worried both members because, according to the guard, the high-pitched noise sounded like weeping in a way. Was there someone in distress? If so, they had to act immediately. The two staff members didn't want to cause panic on the airport floor, so they quickly made their way to a remote office in the building. they asked Mary and her prospective dog to accompany them. This clever dog noticed the situation in the first place, so maybe he could help again. Mary agreed and followed the men to a quieter part of the airport. The office door closed, and from that point on, everything went very fast. The utility worker reached inside one of the cabinets and pulled out blueprint maps of the building. He placed them in the center of the table and pointed out the location of the water drain in the main hall. That's where the dog sat, and here's the route it travels. His fingers moved along the paper. It was an easy route to follow, and everyone in the room saw where water exited the north wall of the building. But when he pointed out that the tube was extremely narrow, not wide enough for even a rabbit to crawl through, he pointed to the ventilation shaft that ran parallel beside it. It's more likely that the sound came from there. But where does it go? The airport security guard, the utility worker, Mary, and Wilson studied the blueprint of the airport building in detail. The layout of the drainage and ventilation system spread out across multiple branches, creating a maze of possibilities. It was not immediately clear where the mysterious sound had come from, but they knew they needed to investigate further. But this was going to be tough. Just as the utility worker began tracing potential routes on the map, Wilson suddenly perked up. His ears stood erect, and he let out a low whine, staring intently at the door. Everyone paused, exchanging glances, as it became clear that Wilson sensed something they couldn't hear. Mary trusted her dog's instincts and decided to let Wilson take the lead. They exited the small office, and Wilson wasted no time. He sniffed the air with determination, pulling on the leash and leading them toward a different airport section. They wove their way past curious travelers, following the dog's focused behavior. The sound was still beyond human ears, but Wilson remained alert, and his demeanor insisted that they kept moving forward. The group followed Wilson through long, winding corridors, moving farther away from the bustling parts of the airport. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Soon, they reached a part of the building that was clearly under construction. The unfinished walls and floors indicated an expansion project, a place meant for construction workers, not travelers, not even staff. "Come here," both workers explained. Wilson stopped in front of a large metal door and began to bark. It was an insistent, almost demanding bark, as if he knew something important lay beyond that door. The utility worker took out a key from his pocket, allowing them to reopen the door to the restricted area once inside. "It locks itself in place, so if you don't have the key, you're stuck," he said. As soon as the door creaked open, Wilson bolted inside. Once the team entered, the door slammed shut behind them, echoing through the vast, empty space. For a moment, everyone stood still. "It's a good thing we have that key," Mary said, holding her heart. She called out for Wilson, her voice bouncing off the walls, but there was no immediate response. The area was silent except for their footsteps. They started walking through the unfinished airport wing, calling for Wilson and hoping to hear his bark in return. The space was dimly lit. Dust hung in the air and countless plastic sheets covered unfinished projects all around them. After what seemed like several minutes, a distant bark finally broke the silence. The team exchanged hopeful glances and hurried toward the sound. As they drew closer, they began to hear something else, a soft, high-pitched sound. It was the same weeping sound from before, but louder and more distinct this time. They realized that Wilson had led them straight to the source they were looking for. "His tracking skills are amazing," the workers said excitedly. They picked up their pace, navigating around construction materials and scaffolding. They turned a corner and were met with an unexpected sight. There, on the cold concrete floor, sat an elderly lady wrapped in a small blanket. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, and her eyes widened at the sight of her rescuer. Wilson sat beside her, his tail wagging gently as if his positive behavior was meant to comfort her. The woman wiped her eyes, visibly relieved. "Thank you, thank you, thank you so much," she said, her voice trembling. She explained that she had been stuck there for an entire day. She was old and sometimes a bit confused, and by accident, she had wandered into the restricted area while looking for a bathroom. With no one around, she feared she might never get out. The elderly woman introduced herself as Judith and explained that she had been on her way to join her husband, who had gone ahead of her on vacation. She had been excited to meet him, but her unfortunate mistake had left her stranded in the most unlikely and inconvenient of places. "I thought I would be trapped here forever," Judith said, her voice still shaky. The airport guard reassured her. You're safe now. Thanks to Wilson. Mary smiled and kneeled. He heard you when we were in the main hall half an hour ago, and he wouldn't give up until he led us to you, she said. Judith looked at Wilson with gratitude in her eyes. She reached out to stroke his head, and Wilson responded with a gentle lick on her hand. Judith then mentioned something curious. She had only started calling for help about 20 minutes ago after hearing a dog's barking through the vents. The group realized that this must have been Wilson barking in the main hall. But this raised an important question. How had Wilson known something was wrong even before Judith started yelling? This simply did not add up. The utility worker scratched his head, puzzled. If she hadn't made a sound, how did Wilson know? He asked aloud. It was a question that lingered in everyone's mind as they helped Judith to her feet and prepared to leave the abandoned construction wing. Wilson's instincts seemed almost supernaturally accurate, but that was something to consider later. Let's get you out of here first. They escorted Judith back to the main airport area, where a medical team was called for a quick checkup. Fortunately, apart from being cold and a little dehydrated, she was in good health. Judith was soon ready to travel again. With the help of airport staff, arrangements were made to continue her journey and join her husband on their planned vacation. In the following days, word of Wilson's heroic actions spread quickly throughout the country. Reporters from various news outlets visited the airport, eager to cover the story of the dog who had saved an elderly woman from an abandoned part of the airport. Mary spoke to several journalists, sharing how Wilson had led them to Judith when no one else could. It was later discovered that Wilson's extraordinary sense of smell had played a crucial role in his actions that day. A team of animal behaviorists conducted tests and concluded that Wilson could not only hear abnormally well, even for a dog, but he could also detect the scent of anxiety. Being trapped and frightened, Judith had likely emitted stress signals that Wilson had picked up through the ventilation system. Wilson's ability to sense distress had been the initial trigger that drew him to the drain cover. And when Judith started calling for help, Wilson's urgency to help out only grew stronger, guiding the group directly to her. It was a unique combination of his acute sense of smell and his loyalty to helping people in need that made this dog so special. The story of Wilson's heroics was featured in newspapers and even on television, where he was invited to some local talk shows. People were amazed by the dog's loyalty, bravery, and extraordinary ability. Wilson became a local hero, and the airport staff honored him with a special ceremony, awarding him a medal for his service in rescuing Judith, who was present via video call since she was still on vacation. Mary looked at Wilson with pride as he received his medal. She knew that her dog was special, but seeing him recognized by so many people filled her heart with joy. Wilson wagged his tail happily, unaware of the fame he had achieved. For him, it had been simple. He had sent someone in need and had done everything he could to help.